Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel with the distinguished speakers and in this wonderful auditorium. So I will be speaking about Armenian-Turkish relations. As you can imagine, this is a very broad topic, both thematically and temporally. So I will not get into the full scope of Armenian-Turkish relations in the past, let's say, centuries, but I've selected a few topics, 3 topics to be precise, and I will focus on those. And they are, in order of appearance, the genocide, the aftermath of the genocide, the importance of the genocide. Secondly, evolving social and political relations in the past, let's say, decades. And finally, the issue of leadership. Let me start with the genocide. The Armenian genocide is a topic that I've worked on. I've written a few books on it. And I've come to the understanding that it is a cornerstone in the way that Armenians and Turks relate to each other. There's no interaction between any single Armenian or Turk, either at a cafe or in a university or in a business setting, that the genocide does not cast a shadow on. So the genocide looms large. And I think the genocide in particularly is important as it was not simply a destructive force, but also a constructive force. So, of course, for Armenians, this meant the immense destruction wrought upon the Western Armenian populations, the cultural, physical destruction, loss of human life, the collective and mass trauma. Those are 2 different things. But on the other hand, of course, for Turkey, this is a very constructive genocide. And I call this a form of creative destruction, not in the economic sense, because it made the Turkish nation state possible in the way that we see it now. In at least 2 ways. It cleared up the Armenian demographic presence in what is now Eastern Turkey, or Western Armenia, or Northern Kurdistan, depending who you ask. And secondly, of course, the perpetrators of the genocide, the organizers of the genocide, both mid-level organizers, practical organizers, as well as the architects of the genocide, continued to found the Turkish Republic. I would invite you to take a look at any picture, any black and white photo of Kemal Atatürk, who is always foregrounded in these pictures, of course, with his charisma, but I would invite you to take a look at the men around him, and almost all of them are up to their eyeballs in blood. And that has repercussions for the way that the state is shaped. Professor Suni, yesterday, he talked about transitology. And there's one element here that's relevant to Turkish-Armenian relations, and that is transitional justice. This is a burgeoning field that looks at the aftermaths of mass crimes such as genocide, crimes against humanity, civil wars. Transitional justice basically has 2 elements. There's material transitional justice and immaterial or symbolic justice. And if we go through the topics of transitional justice, some of the themes that are relevant, then we see that none of them bear any relevance actually to the Turkish-Armenian case. Namely, we're starting with material. Material forms of transitional justice are restitution, reparations, amnesty in the case of civil wars, and finally rehabilitation of people who were killed and who were not rehabilitated. Now, none of these topics have been covered to any satisfaction. I've written a book on the confiscation of Armenian property. Several dozens of kilometers from here, you can find farms and orchards and workshops and whatnot that belong to Armenians. And across the entire Turkish Republic, we can honestly say that not a single piece was restituted. That which was briefly restituted, such as Surp Giragos church in Diyarbakir, recently was also damaged in the fighting between the PKK and the Turkish army. If we look at symbolic forms of transitional justice, there are at least 4 elements here as well. So commemorations, of course there's acknowledgement and apology, but commemorations, research, museums, and monuments. None of these things are relevant in Turkish-Armenian relations. We are at the absolute 0 point of transitional justice. So that's one important thing, and I think that matters when we look at both evolving relations and the recognition of the genocide, and also in the diplomatic relations between Turkey and Armenia, this has become an issue. It doesn't go away, simply won't go away. My second point, my second topic is about evolving social and political relations. So if we take seriously the genocide as a form of extreme disempowerment of Armenians and a social distancing between Armenians and Turks, then there are, I think, two distinct, more kind of macro sociological processes that are at play. On the one hand, we see a shift from triadic relations to dyadic relations between Armenians and Turks, and secondly, a shift from hierarchical to more horizontal relations. So the shift from triadic relations to dyadic relations, this is a fancy term for basically a triangle relationship in which we, as Armenians and Turks, used to live, namely in mixed Armenian, Kurdish, Turkish territories. This is a kind of complex three-way figuration. If you look at the relations between Armenians and Turks before the genocide, in almost all of these reports, from the Constitution down to the reports that Grigor Zohrab wrote, for example, it is always conceived as a three-way communication, a triangle relationship. This has changed after the genocide. After the genocide, we're dealing now mostly with a dyadic relationship, so a binary relationship, on the one hand between Armenians and Turks, and on the other hand between Kurds and Turks. Of course, there are also relationships between Kurds and Armenians, but at a political level, this is a much less relevant phenomenon. Now, why is this relevant? Because one can argue that binary relations are more zero-sum. They are more conflictuous for that reason, because there's no possibility of alliances or mediation. And this is one major direction of the political process. This is relevant not only for Turkish-Armenian relations, but also for Turkish-Kurdish relations. Somebody spoke in the past couple of days about the loneliness of Kurds as they stand up to the onslaught of the Turkish army and the persecution of Kurds throughout the Turkish Republic. This also is a process, or is a product of this change from the triadic to the dyadic relationship and the absence of Armenians. The second major shift was the shift from hierarchical to horizontal relations. So Turks historically have been, politically at least, superimposed on Armenian Ottoman subjects. And we see there are reverberations of this imperial hangover. I'm sure all of you have spoken with one or more Turkish persons who might have said, well, we had such great relations. We never had any problems in Istanbul. It was lovely. I don't understand this. And this is a kind of imperial hangover. So there's no need to listen to the imperial subaltern or the subject. We don't need to learn their language. We don't need to read the memoirs or the literature. We don't need to listen. This, I think, is fundamentally still, these are the crumbs of hierarchical thinking in the minds of many Turks. And what is gradually happening, this is a very gradual process, and there's no foregone conclusion, a gradual kind of humble egalitarianism is the direction in which we are gradually moving, but very slowly. You can call this a decolonization of Turkish society, or kind of the shift, the end of apartheid, or the civil rights movement in the US. But of course, this is a very slow process, and certainly not finished. Finally, the issue of leadership. Now, there's anybody who thought that nationalism studies was obsolete and it's not relevant anymore, is sadly mistaken, I think. I think this is crucial, and some things they don't change, actually. So there's transition, but there's a lot of change, but also continuity. Now, if we look at the governments in coalition that governed Turkey in the past couple of decades, we see that there are Kemalist-dominated governments. There are more nationalist-dominated governments by the Nationalist Action Party, and since the rise of the AKP, a more kind of moderate Islamist. Now, these parties, and these also the constituencies of these parties, they disagree profoundly on the direction of the country or core values, with one exception, and that's the genocide and the Turkish-Armenian relations. We have, of course, seen some change. We have seen some brave moves by Abdullah Gül or by Ahmet Davutoğlu, and anybody who is close enough to these individuals realizes that they were quite sincere also in their intentions. But we haven't seen any major breakthroughs. So both in the raison d'etat and the state formation processes, as well as in the national identity issues, so the nation formation processes. We have seen a more autonomous process. We have seen kind of not an essentialism, but a kind of resistance to change. Yesterday, Professor English spoke about the relevance of leadership, and Ambassador Yerevan also spoke about the pivotal issue of personality. Now, as I said, Abdullah Gül, Ahmet Davutoğlu, Tayyip Erdogan, these are all personalities, one more or less charismatic than the other. But what we haven't seen yet is a kind of major breakthrough, like a courageous leadership, such as, and I'm sure you're wondering what this photo is here. This is a picture of Willy Brandt, the German chancellor, who in December 1970 visited the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, in which, as you know, 1944, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and almost everybody was killed in this massacre. And Willy Brandt was supposed to make a fairly standard visit, and relations between Poland and Germany were tense, of course. This is the period of the Soviet Union. And as he walked to the memorial, he last minute made a knee fall in front of this memorial. And there's a very dramatic video of it you can see on YouTube. And he made this knee fall in apology. It was unplanned. His direct aides, as well as the translators and the Polish translators and the photography personnel there did not expect it. You can see this also in the footage. This was a major kind of iconic moment in German history, and also in German-Polish relations, German-Jewish relations, because Willy Brandt made this as an apology. He accepted the borders between Germany and Poland. Remember, they were contested until 1970, and for this he drew a lot of criticism from the Vertriebene, the Germans who were expelled from Eastern Europe, millions of Germans and their children. Now, in spite of this criticism, he carried out this policy, this Ostpolitik of normalization, normalized relationships between Germany and Poland, made also the European Union possible. And the year after, 1971, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I want to end with a dream. One day I woke up from a dream, and I dreamt that this was Tayyip Erdogan would fly to Tsitsernaka-Pert. He would walk up to the memorial, get on his knees, apologize. The next day he would go on television and say, literally, my fellow Turks, we have made a terrible mistake. There was a genocide. We're going to fully rectify everything. These are the elements of transitional justice. We will go through them. And then I woke up from the dream. Thank you for your attention.